No. Can you hear me now? Okay. Good evening, Pittsburgh, and good evening to our live stream audience, I'm proud to say from around the world. I think we all remember where we were on June 17th, 2015, when 9 innocent African Americans were killed in cold blood by a shooter espousing hate. It was the latest in a long history of racialized violence against Africans and people of African descent, which threatens often to overshadow an even longer history of our contributions to the U.S. South and the New World. My name is Etta L. Fields Black. I am producer and librettist for the Requiem for Rice. This evening, the Requiem for Rice is proud to engage in a dialogue with 2 Charleston artists about honoring the Charleston 9, why we need a requiem for African and African American history. I want to start first by thanking our partners, the African Heritage Classroom Committee at the University of Pittsburgh, under the leadership of Chair Laura Ann Bray. We are delighted to partner with AHCC in their initiatives to learn more about Gullah Geechee history and culture. If you don't have a membership to the African Heritage Classroom, please consider taking out one tonight at their table in the cloister of this building. We will begin tonight with a moment of prayer by Reverend Maureen F. Cross Bolden, Treasurer for the African Classroom Committee. Reverend Bolden has recently stepped down after 10 years of service as the chair of the committee. She is past president and life member of the Alumni Council, life member of the NAACP Pittsburgh, and most recently chair for the Impact Committee at St. James AME Church. This godmother of 4, grandmother of 7, and great-grandmother of 11 has given 60 years of service to her committee. We are grateful that she brings the voice of the AME Church tonight as we honor the innocent brothers and sisters slain at the historic Emmanuel AME Church. Then we are going to hear from our moderator, Ann Quinique Wingfield, who is poised to take the Pittsburgh music scene by storm. Ann Quinique is an extremely versatile vocalist and teaching artist, specializing in opera, classical music, jazz, and soul. She has performed lead operatic roles such as Magda Sorrell of Carl Minati's The Council and Hannah Glawari of Franz Lehar's The Merry Widow, and the title role of La Parachole by Offenbach. She holds a Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree in voice performance from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Ann Quinique currently teaches voice and piano at Hope Academy of East Liberty Presbyterian Church. Ann Quinique is going to introduce our guests, Jonathan Green and Lee Pringle. And I want to say a personal word of thanks to these extraordinary and visionary men. Many things have changed after the murders at Mother Emanuel AME Church, including our plans to launch the Requiem for Rice. But Jonathan Green insisted that we launch the Requiem here in Pittsburgh. And I mean insisted. You don't say no to Jonathan Green, okay? And Lee Pringle insisted that he was coming to Pittsburgh regardless. They were very insistent. Both made sacrifices and investments so that this event could occur and would be successful. We wanted to launch the Requiem for Rice by honoring the innocent African Americans at Emmanuel AME Church and to introduce the idea that we need a requiem, a mass for the dead, for our ancestors. We need to honor and memorialize millions of Africans who died as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, enslavement, colonialism, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, lynching, The list of victims of racialized violence goes on. It includes the Emmanuel Nine, and it includes Africans who were enslaved on low-country rice plantations, whose labor and technology built one of the most lucrative industries in the U.S. South. We have so many stories to tell. Now, many of you know me as an academic historian, a professor at Carnegie Mellon, who has written about rice farmers in West Africa and enslaved on South Carolina and Georgia plantations. You may not know that I am also the great-granddaughter of Africans who were enslaved on rice plantations. And I have to tell you, none of my academic training or 22 years of researching West African rice farmers could have prepared me to witness my ancestors' broken, watery, and unmarked graves on a rice plantation outside of Charleston, South Carolina, or to find their names and their lives in the historical sources I am researching. It was Jonathan Green's vision that we need a requiem for rice that gave me the courage to use the arts to make something beautiful out of a history of violence, exploitation, and death, and to tell the story of our ancestors' immense sufferings and innumerable contributions to the economy and culture of the U.S. South. And Lee Pringle's The Color of Music Black Classical Musicians Festival, with its all-black orchestras, choirs, soloists, led by black conductors, and performing works by black composers, is really the only vehicle to bring this story to life. I am grateful to Jonathan Green and Lee Pringle and the rest of the Requiem's creative team, filmmaker-director Julie Dash, composer Trevor Weston, and conductor Marlon Daniel for their commitment to telling our stories, using the arts to educate the world about our history full of, yes, adversity, but also resilience, ingenuity, and great beauty. The Requiem for Rice is grateful for support from Carnegie Mellon's Center for the Arts in Society Performance Initiative and Advancing the Black Arts Pittsburgh, a partnership of the Pittsburgh Foundation and the Heinz Endowment. The next program for the Requiem for Rice will be a dialogue on rice and the Gullah Geechee on Friday, September 18th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We will live stream from the Low Country Rice Culture Forum in Georgetown, South Carolina. So if you can't make it, the link will be on our website, www.requiemforrice.com. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us for this evening. Let's now honor our ancestors and tell our story.
Good evening, beloved. Humility that I stand before you for such a time as I happen to be an AME ordained minister. The AME Church has been intricately involved in the horrific acts of what's become coined as the Charleston Nine. But you know, the fact that the family said, "We forgive you," took me straight to someone who once said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." His name was Jesus. So in that spirit, let us go to the throne of grace. Come with me. Heavenly Father, we come praising your holy name. God, we come for whatever God these people assembled here serve, that they will come to you, Lord, because we truly all came from one mother and father, and we will find our way back home. God, we ask that you bless the parents and give us the courage to tell our stories, Lord. Our children need to know who they are and whose they are, and we must tell our stories, Lord. We ask that you bless this evening and all the opportunities that it proposes, God, and all the opportunities for us to interact and connect with, and all the opportunities for us to delve into the diaspora, God. Yes, they took us across the Atlantic, God, but there are so many stories to tell. And we are zeroing in on the Gullah Geechee, South Carolina era. And we know that the children who you called home from Emmanuel, oh God, they were praying to you. They were studying your word, and you took them home. And while that young man, who someone filled him with evil, because babies are not born evil, he thought he would start a war. And what he did was start an uprising for us to stand together in love, for us to stand together and examine our human condition. So be with us, bless the African Heritage Classroom Committee, the nationality rooms of University of Pittsburgh, as we dare to dig and delve into our being, into our past. And we will give you all the honor, glory, and praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much, Reverend Bolden, for that beautiful and powerful prayer. I just want to start by saying thank you for being here tonight. It's so exciting to see such a beautiful audience tonight, and we also want to make sure that we recognize our online audience as well from around the world. As Etta mentioned earlier, we are live streaming this, so you are on TV and you can wave. We can wave and say hello to our viewers from across the world. But I'm just going to start by introducing our wonderful guests we're so honored to have with us tonight. And we'll start with Mr. Jonathan Green. It is said that Jonathan Green is one of the most acclaimed African-American artists to come from the South. To stop there, however, would be mere generalization. A native of the South Carolina Low Country, Mr. Green is a champion of Gullah culture, honoring his roots and proudly portraying this unique region of America to his audiences. Unknown by many Americans, members of the Gullah community are descendants of slaves who worked in the rice fields of coastal plantations. Located in the lovely marsh landscapes of South Carolina and Georgia, the Gullah heritage is one of the most well-preserved African-American cultures in the country. Jonathan Green, with his unmistakable artistic style, paints exuberant vignettes of this quiet, understated, yet vibrant culture. His art is a celebration of the dignity of a way of life that was nearly forgotten. These paintings, characterized by vivid colors and uplifting movement, are artistic redemption for the hardships of former times. Jonathan Green's art is loved and admired by a host of collectors and curators. A book of his work entitled Gullah Images, published by the University of South Carolina Press, has been a consistent bestseller. Director of the Columbia City Ballet created a stunning ballet performance inspired by Mr. Green's work. Jonathan Green has become a cultural icon in the South. In recent years, Jonathan Green has combined his role as artist with that of educator, co-creating the Low Country Rice Culture Project, which builds partnerships to explore, reveal, and reclaim the shared cultural inheritance of the Low Country rice industry. The project emphasizes examining the consequences of history and the meaning of heritage as a launching point for broad discussions of race, class, art, trade, history, and economics. along with a clear frame of reference and safe environment in which such dialogue can occur without fear of backlash or misunderstanding. Please welcome Mr. Jonathan Green. Also tonight we have with us Mr. Lee Pringle. Movie and television orchestral string soundtracks of the 1970s and early 1980s stirred a young Lee Pringle and led him to dream of a life far removed from his rural South Carolina Lowcountry home. Like many African American children in the South, he was immersed in music from an early age. From the Sunbeam Choir at his childhood church, Mount Pisgah AME, and through band and choral lessons and activities in high school. Those experiences allowed Mr. Pringle to develop into an accomplished tenor who has sung and soloed with community choirs throughout South Carolina and North Carolina. In addition to performing, Mr. Pringle undertook many production activities, eventually leading to his own marketing and production firm, Buster LC Productions. The company has co-produced and assisted in forming the Charleston International Festival of Choirs and the African Choral Festival in Ghana, West Africa. Produced more than 150 orchestral and choral concerts and solo recitals regionally and internationally, and continues to foster emerging young vocalists from across the country through an ongoing series of recitals. Mr. Pringle is the founder of the Charleston Symphony Orchestra Gospel Choir, an 85-member choir now in its 14th season, which continues to garner wide acclaim. Mr. Pringle also is founder and president of Charleston Spiritual Ensemble and the Charleston Spiritual Ensemble Chorale, groups that are recognized for their excellence in vocal performance and have rapidly built a keen following in the Carolinas. In March 2012, Mr. Pringle led the CSO Gospel Choir and the Charleston Spiritual Ensemble on a choral tour to Ghana, the African embarkation point for many who became enslaved in the New World. Mr. Pringle also founded the Color of Music Festival, a 10-year dream in the making. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you very much.
So as Etta mentioned earlier, tonight we are discussing and honoring the Emmanuel 9 who were tragically killed in Charleston on June 17th. And we're also talking about why African and African Americans need a requiem for our history. We also want to make you aware that if you have not already, please turn your cell phones to silent, because we are recording this discussion and we'll be using it later. And also not to disturb our online guests, hello, who across the world. We also want to make you aware that tonight we are launching Requiem for Rice, but also our social media. So please follow us on Twitter at Requiem for Rice, also on Facebook, Requiem for Rice. And if you would like to tell friends about what's happening tonight in hopes that they would stream in also, you can go to the website if you're on your phone or want to tell someone, www.requiemforrice.com, and there is a link right on the website where someone can watch and tune in to what we're talking about this evening. So please feel free to do that throughout and share with our guests at home, our friends and family. Let's see, anything else before we get started? I don't think so. So I want to start by asking Jonathan and Lee to share a little bit about what you're doing with your work currently, and if you can talk a little bit about your experience being from Charleston. I don't know if you were there on the day or if you were traveling, but knowing that that's your home base, what are some of the things that went through your mind or some of the things that ensued afterwards when you found out about the terrible tragedy on June 17th? Mr. Jonathan, will you start?
Currently, I'm working on a collection of paintings around the great Robert Smalls, which is an unbelievable pleasure and opportunity for me. Unfortunately, few people know about the great Robert Smalls, and if it wasn't for Robert Smalls, we all would not be sitting here in these seats today, because he was ingenious in confiscating the Planter, which was the Confederate supply ship that took supplies to the Confederate Army. And in taking over that ship, he then transferred over to the Union Army. So he's the most important person, and he was the first to start many things in South Carolina, such as public education. He was also the first to start the fire department in Beaufort, South Carolina, and the Coast Guard, and it just goes on and on. He was also very active in politics. He was a senator, legislator, and one of the most fascinating part about Robert Smalls for me was that a man that was born into slavery then garnered his freedom and subsequently a level of wealth, was able to purchase the very home that he grew up in as a child, as an enslaved child. And he also provided a place for the family that owned him. After the Civil War, of course, most of South Carolina was devastated. And rather than turning out the very people that enslaved him, he welcomed them to continue staying in the home and provided them with everything they needed as they had before the war. The book was written in 1970 by Dr. Louise Merriweather, and she's a very good friend of mine. She's celebrating her we just celebrated her 96th birthday. And of course, you know, older people are very shrewd. She trapped me into doing this project. It was not a project I wanted to do because it involves really pretty much of, I think, what any artist should be able to do, and that's being a person that's capable of drawing and painting not only images of people, but also landscape, architecture, every discipline imaginable of the arts. Well, that's what doing this series of illustration is going to require. And I'm almost finished with it, and so that's one of the most exciting things. I'm also just finished the Seeking Project, which is a project that I'm using to help engage mostly young African American children into the importance of seeking, which is a project that an opportunity that I went through as a child. It is finding yourself. It is a way of having conversations with yourself, seeking your higher power, and being in tune with that, and then being welcomed into the church of your community. And that's very much in West African tradition, where you're out in the wilderness for a number of days trying to find yourself. Of course, you're not allowed to bathe or eat any solid food, so it's as they would say, it's quite a trip to go through, and I remember it vividly. Also working on a project of accessories. I have a stint in the fashion world. I worked for the House of Pierre Balmain, and I also did a project with Valentino. And with where I'm from, having such a close African connection, I wanted to create something that men and women could wear, a very simple piece of fabric. It's about 86 inches by 36 inches. It's silk with a satin backing and a hidden stitch, and it's a shawl. And so I'm hoping to transfer much of my work into textiles, which is a background of mine as well, coming out of the Art Institute of Chicago. And of course, most recently and most importantly is working with Dr. Etta Fields Black and Lee Pringle with this Requiem for Rice.
So first of all, I want to thank Etta for just her tenacity to stay the course and chase two very busy individuals who get buried in email, like most of you who are multitasking. But I also want to thank my friend Jonathan Green, and I just want to say how honored I am to be on a stage with him, to be noted as an artist, something that took me a while because I have a 25-year career in corporate financial services that I was doing parallel to my application as an arts administrator. But there aren't many people who live and walk the way Jonathan Green does. And I am just in awe with his ability. And if you didn't know anything about him until today, do some research and you'll understand how unique of an opportunity this is for all of us to hear this gentleman speak. The question was, what are we doing right now? And as Anquanique indicated, for the past 3 years after leaving corporate America, I embarked upon something that had never been done before. And that was to assemble a group of classically trained Black musicians. And I used the word Black purposely because I did not want to alienate any Black classical musicians from around the globe, to be a part of something that I believe will change the face of classical music. And that is, for 1 week, present a series of concerts with an all-Black orchestra, an all-Black quartet, all-Black concert pianist, classically trained organist, and showcase the enormous talent in North America that go to some of the top conservatories around the world, who yet have not a place on the top 10 cities' orchestra stages. The orchestra world is a complicated world, and what I'm doing is not an indictment on what they've been doing. I will say, unlike in the past, where we didn't have the wherewithal to create our own, it's funny how you go full circle back to your origins. And I think many of you know, prior to the Great Migration, the Black community was pretty much self-contained. We had to be. And so classical music is not new to us. In fact, we were in classical music before Amadeus Mozart. From Mozart to Beethoven, they all had protégés who were Black. Many were mulattoes, but these pioneers were not written about. White and Black ethnomusicologists have studied this, but because classical music is not jazz, it's not R&B, and it's not gospel, it's not something that publishers or folks who produce CDs can see themselves making a lot of money. As a result, we've had this, I call it a merry-go-round of a perception that classical music is white people's music. Well, if you look up the name of Chevalier de Saint-Georges or Joseph Boulogne, you'll see that not only was he an opera composer and a master fencer and a general in Napoleon's army and appointed to the Paris Opera's music director, but because of his skin color, the Divas a Day refused to perform for him. The one thing I knew I could bring to the table that was unique to the traditional path of arts administration was I had a corporate marketing background. And most of you know, if you've done anything with arts management, it takes a lot of desk to put on any classical performance, be it opera, ballet, or a symphonic work. And because of the timing and because the Charleston Symphony Orchestra was pretty forward thinking, it allowed me to have a platform through a modern genre, gospel, to go back and educate them that my roots are not with a 1950s origin that is a spinoff from the blues. My origins actually go back to the first 3 movements of the first Italian opera in 1607. So I say to folks, the African American spiritual and Black people's contribution to the classical genre is parallel to what the Italians were doing. We just didn't have anybody writing it or publishing it. So imagine this. If the kings and queens of the west coast of Africa had their music exported, we wouldn't be using Italian terms. Imagine that for a moment. So in a Reader's Digest version, that's what I've been doing. And I am hoping that by way of Etta, Carnegie Mellon, and the Pittsburgh Trust, and many other institutions that are stepping up to solidify through the August Wilson Center the contributions that folks of African ancestry has contributed to the world of hearing it, seeing it, and feeling it, we can together change what we know as classical music today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is I wanted to make sure that you all should have received some index cards where you can write down a question. We're going to do this in a way that's sort of non-traditional. We won't want this to be, we have a panel discussion and then you ask questions later. We really want you to be a part of the conversation in real time. So if you do have a question, you can write it down and raise your hand. Dr. Etta will take your card and bring it up and we'll ask your question. We're also taking questions from online as well. So we have some folks tweeting into us, emailing us, and sending in questions as well. So this is a conversation for us here, those of us who are here physically, and also for our online audience as well. So I'm going to ask an interesting question that came in from online. And I want to get your opinion, and also for our guests as well. If you do have a comment, you can also raise your hand and share with us. But they say, my grandmother is very interested in her enslaved ancestors, but it's 2015. Why do I need to go back in history when things are not as bad for me as they were for her? Thoughts?
I'm going to acquiesce to my friend Jonathan, and then I'll comment on this.
Well, I'm a believer, and the best way to answer a question is to tell your own story. And my own story starts with the rice fields of South Carolina. Most African American kids, with what little history courses we have in school today, when I was in school as a kid in the early 60s, we had more of a history course. Well, today that history course has been severely diminished. So most African American kids do not have a clue as to the economics of African American people in this country. And the economics is the driving force of any civilization, any culture. And they also don't have much of a knowledge of their connection to the continent of Africa, which is extremely important when you look like me and your only reference to someone looking like me is out of an enslaved culture. It's indicative of our educational facilities to put slavery aside and not allow kids to feel that black people own slavery. Everybody has been enslaved at some point in time in life. Learning about the importance of rice for me has helped me to learn history. So when I look at the great cities such as St. Augustine, Savannah, Beaufort, Charleston, Georgetown, all great port cities. And when you look at the magnificence of those cities were laid out and built by African laborers, then maintained by enslaved Africans. It is no surprise that you would have most of the heads of Europe coming to America would go to South Carolina first. Today in South Carolina, we have an estimated 502 plantation sites, historical plantation sites. Now, all of those plantation sites, in my estimation, are really the ceremonial, ancestral burial ground of our ancestors. So that's important in itself. And then you look at the magnificence of a plantation. How many of you have been to a plantation? It's a city. And what does it take to operate a city? It takes a lot. Certainly, there were few, if any, Euro-Americans living and existing on plantation sites, such as rice fields. It was completely built, operated, maintained by Africans and African American people. Rice was the Silicon Valley of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. arguably, we can say the American Revolution really was based on economics and enslaved labor. That's a powerful history course in itself, and it is more than enough of a reason for anyone to want to know about and research their ancestry. And then you add on to that the arts, the culture, medicinal, agriculture, every aspect of life, not to mention the nursing of millions of not only African babies, but also your American babies.
And I would add to that, I've always been a person who loved learning. And I still to this day try to make sure that I learn something new every day. Just one thing I didn't know yesterday. And through music, I found that it was the old cliche, the universal language that everybody pretty much understands. If you can remember Eartha Kitt, who's a native South Carolinian, singing, C'est si bon, and, speaking French, but you didn't know what she was saying if you didn't speak French, but you just thought it sounded so good, you were interested in the song. Through a chronological progression, I utilize the African American spiritual to tell our story through music and narration, and in some cases, multimedia with visuals. And the reason that I felt, as the caller submitted online, why would I need to learn when things are easy for me? I'm not discriminated against to take out a mortgage, and people are not pointing me to a whites-only, fountain, etc. Is because if you don't know your history, you're very likely to repeat it. I'm producing next October a choral concert entitled Blacks and Jews, The Parallels of Our Lives. Now, the reason that I'm going back to something that I think people have kind of put aside, the enslavement of my people and the atrocities that have been presented on to Jewish people, that's still happening, are two common places that blacks and Jews have. I think all of us were pretty shocked to see in a place like Paris, the anti-Semitism going on, and in other portions of the world against Jewish people. It was shocking to me. And when I think about how many young black boys were shot in the past 24 months, do you see where I'm going with this parallel? We're literally going back to values, okay, that people thought we didn't have to worry about that. Nobody's hauling Jews together and exterminating them now, so Jewish people don't have a problem. Black folks can go and live anywhere they want to and so forth. But then you see Trayvon, and just in Cincinnati, okay? And I can assure you there is somebody who is doing something that is despicable towards the Jewish community. We owe it to ourselves as a society to revisit our history and make sure every opportunity you get to expose a young child to a learning experience that may be completely boredom, but you'd be surprised how much they absorb and remember why grandma or granddad took me to an event that they thought was important for me to be there. So I think those of us who are in the arts, Jonathan does it through his art and variations. I get to do it through educating people about music and that history and why Jews and blacks were in lockstep during the 50s and 60s, because they had a lot that they were experiencing together. The pigment of their skin might have been different, But those two communities have continued to have a very close relationship because even today, we are still being discriminated against in ways that we never thought we would visit in 2014, 2015. It's just amazing. So I would say to the person who submitted that question, learn something every day. And if you can, do it autobiographical. Okay.
Yes.
Do we have mics for the people in the audience? Because I don't think the people online are going to be able to hear.
It is my understanding that one of the reasons why we don't know about the great artists and musicians in the world, in the European world before the 16th century, was because before the 16th century there was no such thing as a racial distinction. The whole concept of race didn't truly come into being until the slave trade began, and the so-called Christians of the Western world had to have some sort of justification for enslaving people, which is a breach of law in both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so they had to decide that these people are not really human. They're subhuman. And therefore, it's perfectly all right for us to treat them as chattel property and to put them to work. And just as you said earlier about the reason for the Revolutionary War and the reason why why Jefferson's line about being opposed to slavery never made it into the Declaration of Independence, because the southern states, the southern colonies, would have voted against it because they made up the majority of the wealth of the so-called 13 colonies. So race came into being in order to justify slavery. And so that's why, just like it's part of our roots, and any plant can only grow as long as those roots are good. And until you get rid of those rotten roots, the plant's going to rot.
I think it's appropriate to tie that into, because the previous question kind of talked about, why do we need to be concerned today about the history if it's not as bad? But saying it's not as bad is really not good enough, right? And so I think to segue to what we were sort of talking about earlier about the Emmanuel AME tragedy, and just thinking about the fact that we are in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, and so many people have been murdered and killed and lost, and so much attention, rightfully so, to these people's lives and to the people who are responsible for their death. Can you talk a little bit about your experience personally on June 17th and in the aftermath that ensued after the tragedy?
I was in Charleston during that time, and I know several people that were killed that day. I had worked with them in many various capacities. Also, the Reverend Clemente Pinckney is related to me on both sides of my family. And I was just stunned. I was so stunned I could barely breathe, seemingly for me, and it was very difficult to leave. I went to the first prayer vigil because I felt I needed to do something and be a part of something, but I'm also a product of segregation and integration. So these this whole concept I understand very well coming from the perspective of a child. But I understood that not from where I lived. We lived on heirs' property, so we owned a large swath of land and we were farmers. I understood it mostly going to school and going into cities and communities. And of course, I think I was probably born an artist. I could never understand why there were so few visual imagery of people that looked like me. And a major part of the breakdown is that as an artist, you couldn't help but to reflect on the lack of art and the supporting of the arts, where we know that no child is born a racist. No child is born to hate. These are things that are learned, that are acquired. And if you don't have a system in place that serves as a sort of a foundation for a better way of living, not only for a few, but for all of us, then so many of these issues began to develop. I couldn't help but to think that during the time of that tragedy, that you can go into any major museum throughout America, to which we're all taxpayers. African American people are anywhere from 12 to 15% of the population. We all pay taxes. And in the entrance of any of those museums, chances are you will not see the image of an African American person. And I know this because I go to the museums regularly, and I always raise that question. Well, if you don't see me and us in other venues, in other capacities, then you certainly don't understand whom I am and what my contributions have been. If you don't see us in the history books, if you don't see us in images that are more reflective of humanity, rather than images that are reflective of propaganda and or of the selling of merchandise such as alcohol and cigarettes, because those are the only images that you see. And I could not help but to think that this incident happened because this person has lost his humanity. And that's what I focused on and I thought about, and the more I thought about it, the more seemingly it was sort of a healing for me to have to deal with this. And especially as an artist, a known artist in a community where people are always asking your opinions and your ideas on these horrendous events. And the events have been horrendous in my lifetime in terms of these types of atrocities. And for me, it's the lack of humanity.
Well, I knew Reverend Clemente Pinckney. I actually produced 2 Piccolo Spoleto performances. Piccolo Spoleto is the small festival to Spoleto Festival USA, which happens in Charleston late May, the first 2 weeks in June. And I got a chance to meet him because I was getting a lot of flack from my patron base, the black community in particular, of why was I doing a lot of my performances in white churches. And I said, well, I'm an AME, and I can tell you that the church downtown will not allow me to move to pulpit furniture. So in order for me to do a concert, from a production standpoint, I can't do it unless I move these things. So one of my choir directors, Dr. Tim Brown, heard me say that, and he said, I'm going to connect you with my pastor, Reverend Pinckney, because he's forward-thinking. And so I met with the Reverend in his study, and I was pretty direct with the Reverend, with respect. I said, Reverend, I'm an AME. And I said, it's a shame that some of the work that I'm doing, I cannot showcase it in these historic edifices in Charleston. Will you allow me to move the furniture? He said, Brother Pringle, you can move the furniture. So we got an agreement, and the first performance that I produced there was a production called The Wind and the Mockingbird. And it was a way of connecting 2 Pulitzer Prize winning authors, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. Now, most people, when they hear Gone with the Wind, they associate it with Prissy and Mammy, and Prissy being hysterical, and Mammy pulling and tugging Miss Scarlett's corset. What many people did not associate with Margaret Mitchell's book was how she gave America its first Academy Award actress, because Hattie McDaniel won the first Best Supporting Actress award. And if you ever get a chance, Google Hattie McDaniel's acceptance speech. And the fact that everybody else sat at crystal-plated tables, she sat at a card table. But her speech was so eloquent and so well delivered, I kept thinking if I ever have an opportunity to tell this story through music, I was going to do it. So I matched those two together, hence The Wind and The Mockingbird, and Reverend Pinckney granted me that opportunity. I subsequently did another production at his church in 2013. Now, I wasn't calling him every day, but I had a great rapport with him. And I also knew the 87-year-old woman who was killed, Miss Susie, because she went with me and my choirs to London and Paris in 2012. We took a choral tour. But the person that I knew the closest was the sexton, Miss Ethel Lance, because in production, you get to the person who's in charge of facilities, you engage them a lot. And as a producer, I take it serious that we put back places the way we found them. So I was typically the last person to leave, and I would always engage her to get in, et cetera. So I was on my way to Seattle to meet with the Langston Hughes Art Institute about bringing the Color Music Festival out there. And while on the phone, my director texted me and said, "Did you hear there was a shooting and 8 people," he said, "were killed at Emmanuel AME Church?" I thought, oh my God, a drug deal gone bad in the parking lot. Didn't really think much about it, not inside the church. And while on the phone with a friend of mine who is a concert pianist in Oregon, Dr. Wham Chapman in Yahoo, he told me, "Are you watching MSNBC?" I said, "No." He says, "Turn on the TV." And so I turned on the television. I'm watching everything. I'm now channel surfing. And I thought, it's very odd that Reverend Pinckney hadn't called in. Because with something as egregious as this, the pastor would call in. So I said to him, I'm really worried because this just doesn't make sense to me that nobody's saying the Reverend is going to be coming or he'll be making a statement. And literally within 2 minutes, I got a text after hanging up the phone from my friend in Seattle and said, it was confirmed that the Reverend was among the slain. I was in shock. And so the next day, I literally had to get on a plane to go to Seattle. And there were so many meetings that I just couldn't pull out of. I had to go, but it was the same experience I had after 9/11. I was traveling at the time for a legacy insurance company. And I cannot tell you the gut-wrenching feeling of knowing people, but even more so, knowing that in the most safe place that we can think of, no matter what your God is, that somebody would come in and worship with you and then come back and kill you. It was devastating. So I literally had to see all the activities of the people on the Ravenel Bridge and the vigils, brokenhearted from Seattle because I couldn't cancel the commitment. But I will tell you, 2 weeks ago, Jonathan was at this performance. I had musicians from the Color Music Festival, musicians from the Charleston Symphony, the Long Bay Symphony, Augusta Symphony, the South Carolina Philharmonic, all come together on the 18th of July to do a concert I entitled E Pluribus Unum. I'm saying the Latin term confusing now, but it's the American Latin term for out of many, one. And it was our way to help heal through music. And of all the productions that I've produced with Colorado Symphony and many other orchestras, it was probably the most fulfilling in that literally a multicultural group of musicians, 140 singers, and over 70 classically trained musicians, both black, white, variations, all free of charge, putting on a performance to honor all of those who were slain. And it was a packed house. I mean, 1,200 seat, big church that could hold everyone. But I think all of us from this point forward, like 9/11, will always be able to think back of where was I on June 17th? Because it will be in the psyche of America and the world for quite a while, I think.
Thank you for sharing your stories. I would like to open it up to the audience to share their experiences as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on his comments. One, you should know that this past week I was at a conference for my church, the Disciples of Christ. We lifted up the AME Church. We passed a resolution that we would stand up and for the AME Church and speak out as a church against the violence and stand with the church and offer up prayers for the church and be in partnership and yoke with the members. And I'll do more with that. I am also moved to speak out about the problem of invisibility. I believe that I always believe that conversations need to include action steps. So we as a body, I think, need to have action steps. We as a people, we've come together to have a conversation. Many of us are familiar with the problems of invisibility, and I like to have things that I can do as a person. One of my suggestions as a person is what you do as a person visiting museums, venues, etc., and you don't see things that look like you, represent you, but you pay taxes, you support it. Challenge the director, challenge the board, get involved, become members of the group that have a say-so, that contribute, do letter writing, vote, organize, show up, make noise, write letters, get involved, organize. Things that we can do as a people, even one, when one, then get others involved. I don't think that it's hopeless. We are not without hope. I like what you said about parallels in people of color and Jewish descent. We cannot forget our history, that when those of us that even watch footage who were not there, when we remember the demonstrations with Dr. King and others, he was arm in arm with all kinds of people. We can't forget that. Those of us that were there and remember that, he had coalitions, and that's what we must do. Those are my comments.
Anyone else have a question? Well, I think we're going to switch gears. I really appreciate what you said about taking action, and I think that the Requiem for Rice is definitely a way for us to take action, for us to think about ways in which to express our grief and our anger and our hope and all of those things that we feel during these times. And so I would like to start by asking Jonathan, like, where was the seed, when was the seed planted? Like, where did it all start? What was the conversation that sparked, or what was it that created the Requiem for Rice? Thank you.
Well, he came over to my place and stayed until 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'm usually getting up at 3 a.m. And but out of all honesty, I am a great lover of music. Every painting that I have painted in my lifetime was painted over great music, regardless if it is jazz, gospel, classical, country western, just great music. And after 10 years of working and finally putting on this symposium on rice, where we just could not engage a lot of the people in the communities that we hoped to have engaged, and particularly the churches. We desperately wanted the support of the churches to help with this Low Country Rice project. So I was thinking of how can we engage people? What is the action to do this? Music. So Dr. Etta Fields Black, who did a stunning job at the symposium. I mean, she just wowed everybody. And it was very clear to me that that lady was a very, very powerful person, and that it was incumbent of me to find her a job. And that job was because of her knowledge, her expertise, the years of living in West Africa, and also the building of this whole momentum around rice culture. You know, most people don't even talk about rice in terms of a culture, in terms of its economics, history, the building of this country. It's like a forgotten word. And what the Low Country Rice Symposium did was it encouraged but also forced academics, historians, and writers to not just talk about rice, but to talk about the culture, the people of rice. So you can read hundreds, if not thousands, of books on rice, but there's no verbiage on the people. And the Carolina Gold rice, the gold is really the people. That's what made it happen. And I felt it was just so important with my friend Lee and Etta to knowing that what he does, it was just a sublime opportunity to have those classical musicians on stage conducting, singing, musically playing about something that we all know about, which is rice culture, which is African culture. And so I said to Lee, and I talked about it, we cried a little, drank a little.
After the performance, because actually we were, the Color Music Festival in Charleston ends on Sunday with a 5 p.m. matinee, and it is a matinee that is an ode to all Black composers and classically trained musicians who have gone on and no one knows about them or understand the major contribution they contributed to the genre. So the first year we did the Mozart Requiem in honor of Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and then the second year we did Giuseppe Verdi's Requiem with Morehouse Glee Club and many other HBCU, historically Black college choruses. And so we were actually having drinks after that, and Jonathan came and you said, I think we should do a Requiem for Rice. And
because I got, I mean, I've heard Requiems most of my career as an artist, and I thought, you know, this is just a story about a poet that no one celebrated his death. If we can do a Requiem around that, for sure we can do a Requiem around rice. And it really was that simple.
Brilliant. And really that's how we segue to the debut, which will come in 2017, and the Color Music Festival Orchestra will be the orchestra to present the commissioned work, and the International African American History Museum that's opening in Charleston, that's Mayor Riley's last big project. Our new concert hall, the Gilliard Center, is about 3 months
Completed.
away. But the International African American Museum is going to be a big deal in Charleston because, as you know, 40% of all Africans who came to this continent came through Charleston. So we are the Ellis Island of slave importation for this country, and many people don't know that history. But I think Eda's given me an indication that we're about to segue into another area here.
No. I wanted to interject. I wanted to
By all means.
weigh in on this birth of the Requiem.
Yes.
Because for my part, it was September 2013, between the two Low Country Rice Culture Forums, because we started in Charleston with a public forum, and then we went to Columbia for an academic forum, and there was a weekend in between. And I thought, oh, great, I'm in Charleston for the weekend, all the archives are closed. I'm going to work on that family history. I'm going to go to the graveyard. And anybody who knows me in Charleston, my family always knows that if I'm in Charleston on a Sunday, I will be at Whitehall AME Church with my family. I will see all of my cousins. I will visit Green Pond. I will visit Pine Community Cemetery to see my great-grandmother and my grandparents' graves, and then I go back to Charleston. So that was the plan, except I was going from Green Pond to Orangeburg to Columbia, okay, and then back to Charleston. So I decided, okay, I'm going to the cemetery. Let me call my cousin. And I always have to have my boots, okay? Always have to have my rice fields boots. They ride shotgun with me when I'm in Charleston because I'm always in the rice fields with my colleagues. So on that trip, I called my cousin and I said, cousin, this is from my grandmother's side, can you take me to the cemetery? I didn't know my way around yet. So he took me to the cemetery, which is owned by the church and maintained by the church. And I photographed and I took notes on all of the tombstones. But I said, cousin, I've been to this cemetery since I was a child. This is the cemetery where my mother began the genealogical research of my father's family. But I have been from corner to corner, back to front in the cemetery. My grandmother's family, the Richards and the Frasers, are buried here. Where are the fields? Where is my daddy's family? My granddaddy's family? He said, oh, you're going to have to ask your grandfather's cousin on the Fields side. Brother Fields will take you there. So I called my grandfather's cousin, who was in his 80s, and he hemmed and hawed a little bit, and then he told me the name of the cemetery. It was on a plantation, okay? And I thought, oh my gosh, I finally found it. I Google it, and it's a rice plantation. So I know, well, if it's a rice plantation, I can get in there because I just have to call my colleagues who work in the rice fields with me. Long story short, after church, after many, many challenges, we got to the cemetery. And that's the cemetery that I found in utter disrepair, okay? It was in utter disrepair. And all of the Fields family graves are not marked or no longer marked. And I have to tell you that experience changed my life. After almost 20 years, well, 14 years, depending on how you count it, but at least 14 years I've been at Carnegie Mellon writing and teaching and studying about the transatlantic slave trade as a West Africanist. And my work is diasporic, so I deal with rice farmers on the low country side. It's one thing to teach about slavery, it's one thing to read about slavery, but to think about it and learn about it in your own family is a completely different story. And as I continue to research this new book that I'm working on, the epic history of the Gullah Geechee, I keep finding the family names in the plantation records, and I'm learning about their lives. It's very challenging. So I have to fast forward, okay? Because as I said, my grandfather's cousin was in his 80s. He had mobility problems. This cemetery, as he would say, was growed up. It's in the woods. He couldn't get out there on his walker. He had a very good memory, but this was also the moment where his memory began to decline. He was the only person in the family that we know of who knew where those unmarked graves were located, who is buried in them. We had no idea. Everything, we had a library in him. November 2014, he passed away. November 2014, he passed away. And I was never able to go out with him to the cemetery to get that information from him, okay? And it was on that trip, which was shortly after the Color of Music Festival, where I went to Jonathan Green's house for lunch. I spent the entire afternoon with Jonathan, holding court, and he was so excited about the Color of Music Festival. And as we talked and shared, he said to me, you know, and he was looking for a way to work with Lee in a way that was authentic, in a way that really highlighted the contributions, the technology of Africans and people of African descent. So the rice and the music. He said to me, you know, we need a requiem for Rice. Now, had I not had the experience in the cemetery, I would have said, Jonathan, I don't have time. I'm busy. I got a new book to write. You know, I got kids. I got a husband. All of these excuses I would have made. But the one thing, and this was revealed to me over a period of time, that I have learned from my relationship with the cemetery, and there's now about 7 cemeteries, rice plantations where my ancestors are buried, was that this story has to be told. And given my very privileged position and my years of research and travel and lecturing and teaching and blah, 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 I'm in a unique position to tell it. But it's not just a story for my colleagues. It's not just a story for specialists in the field. It's a story for you, right? People who may never buy one of my books. And so the opportunity to have this completely new venue, new audience, to tell this story, I couldn't say no. Not only to Jonathan Green, but to my ancestors, to tell this story of rice and to tell this story of technology that is African, and to bring all of these genres that nobody would think of as fitting together, to bring them together, and to encourage other people to research their own families and to tell their own stories. We have so many stories to tell. We have so many stories to tell.
Thank you.
That's a question.
Dr. Black, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I was the one in the family after Roots came out that kept asking questions of everybody on both sides. I was told more than once that the answers to your questions are in the grave. But I kept asking, and you run into skeletons. And I said, give me my skeletons, they're mine. Take them out of the closet. I actually had researched 10 generations back. Those records got lost. Had I not lost them, we would have 15 generations. So I beseech all of you, talk to your children, talk to your family. Tell your stories. It's your story. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. Tell them the story. And I think if we would do that, our children wouldn't behave the way they do. Our children don't know who they are.
There you go.
And I think it's my generation that fell because our children aren't teaching their children. We're kings and queens, and we need to know it. So God bless you, all of you, for your work. And I certainly will have some new things to put in my library. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things that we've talked about is how do we use classical music as the vehicle for telling our story in this way, for telling these stories. And as a classical singer myself, I've always found myself in situations where I may be the only black singer, or I may be performing for an audience of folks who do not look like me. And so part of my work as a musician is always to take classical music and put it in spaces that are non-traditional, so that people know that this art is for everyone, and that we can take ownership over this art form. And so I'm just excited about the Requiem, and also about the education of classical music and of the history of Black people and African Americans and African Europeans who have contributed to classical music, performers, composers alike. And so we have some questions from the audience, which I think are perfectly appropriate in terms of making sure we educate ourselves about classical music, so that when we go to experience it, that we feel like it is for us, whoever you are, as young as you are, as old as you are, no matter who you are. So I have a couple of questions which are both the same. Why do we need a Requiem? How will that help? What does it mean? And can you start, Lee, by just explaining to us the definition of a Requiem and historically what it is?
It's a mass for the dead. And the Roman Catholic Church and other denominations that are spinoffs from the Roman Catholic Church use it. And typically at what we would call a funeral or a service, it's a Requiem Mass. And composers, every major composer of the classical era have done some type of Mass. I think, if you were to think of requiems that most people know, the Mozart Requiem would be top of the list. These composers were doing these compositions many times for money. It wasn't because they had an affinity to religion, and it helped them to get to the next phase in their lives, because wealthy benefactors would pay them to do it. Going to Jonathan's brilliant idea of a requiem for rice, I want you to take just a moment to think about his comment about the rice cultivation off the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida was really the equivalent of the kind of money the steel barons had up here. The microchip, Bill Gates, billions. I mean, this is the kind of money that was generated from the most back-breaking labor you can ever imagine. And if you've ever gone to the continent of Africa and visited some of the African countries that are on the West Coast, you'll understand how the climate they thrived in was one that they could survive in here. Swampy, marshy, malaria, mosquitoes, all these things that, we could not even imagine how people endured that. But yet, it truly is the foundation of the American society. Yet, no one has done an homage of some sort that would say, until his brilliant idea, we're going to honor it. And we're going to honor it for something that built a nation, was the economic engine behind the whole purpose of the war, was the reason that people didn't want to give us up. Think about it. There's a lot of money involved. Okay, a lot of money. So why do we need a requiem? We need a requiem because beforehand we didn't have anybody with the wherewithal to do one, honoring a culture that is not written about enough. And so what I'm hoping will come of this, through the academic arm of what Dr. Fields Black is doing at Carnegie Mellon, and one of the most prolific artists of our time, and a little group that started in Charleston, South Carolina called the Color Music Festival Orchestra can bring those elements of what I mentioned earlier, see it, feel it, and hear it. And you're going to hear that a lot more. Just make a mental note of it. But we're delighted that we will be the arm that helps to facilitate something that when it is debuted in Pittsburgh, I believe we're going to have a capacity crowd, because this city has an appreciation for the art, and it's a very progressive city, and I'm just so happy to be here to be a part of it.
I concur, and I'm a huge believer in that in order to celebrate something, in order to be creative about something, you have to first own it. And owning something is accepting something, and accepting all of it. But accepting it and knowing that it happened then, and by that happening, we are here now. And when we look back at, say, 50 years, the unbelievable changes we have made. Now, some people will say that we have stepped back a little bit, but I'm an optimist. I always look at the positive. And when you see little kids going into museums, little African American kids, little white kids going into museums, when the African American children cannot see themselves on those walls, their relationship diminishes. They have nothing to talk about. The white kids are usually ashamed of the fact that their black friends can't see themselves, have nothing to talk about. And the black kids are numb because they can't see themselves on those walls. So if you don't have something, a major score to celebrate a history and a culture, then there isn't much of a need for any young person to want to investigate their history and their culture.
I believe we have a comment in the audience, yes?
Yes, I'm Kay Fitz with the African Heritage Classroom Committee, and I just want to make mention of the fact of our creation. Pitt has 29 nationality rooms. Most of them were built in the 30s when they had countries, and the various countries got their rooms built. And then later, there was a group in the 30s that wanted to build a room in the cathedral, but it didn't happen. Then fast forward to about 35 years ago, the concept came up again. And we are unusual in that the rooms in the cathedral represent one country. We represent the whole continent. And that makes us very special because we can go country by country, see what is happening now versus what happened then, and we can introduce and educate the people, at least in the United States and in Pittsburgh, about their history, and vis-a-vis the fact that we represent the whole continent, which was a challenge to do. But I'm glad we did it, and we own it. Now that's my commercial for joining the African Heritage Classroom Committee. My other commercial is for a group called the African American Historical and Genealogy Society. We were started some years ago. Our main chapter is in Washington, D.C. We have 20 chapters so far across the United States. And that is the group to join if you want to actually document your history, find out where it is, find your ancestors, and go as far as you can. And that's our purpose. Now, everyone is welcome to join the African Heritage Classroom Committee. On our swap card, we have information, and we said we'd like you to join African or Not, because the African or Not people who were there in Africa, and they, like this woman here, would need to tell their story about what they don't know or how they didn't relate or all these other things that may have happened in our history. So we welcome everyone, whatever color you are, to join the African Heritage Classroom Committee, because chances are somebody in the continent came into your being wherever you are in Europe or Asia.
Can I want to take a moment, Antonique, and I want to acknowledge something that I don't always get an opportunity to do it. And I have had these conversations with Jonathan, I think last night over dinner with Etta and Quinique. I am a 1963-64 baby. So in other words, my parents, they brought me into being in 1963 and I came out in 1964. And I think that I am probably one of the luckiest generations. And the reason that I say that is because I get to literally walk the rice paddies that all of you push down, okay? So the things that I do that are connected to history, I do it because I feel, unlike the generation behind me, I'm the last generation to actually understand when segregation of the schools ended. I started school in the year it had to be in full measure, 1969-70. It took me a long time being raised in the South to understand why I was bused at 5 a.m. in the morning, 18 miles to a Title I school, and I passed signs that said Berkeley Academy, John's Academy. I couldn't understand it. But it was the black educators, many of whom were hard-stepping black men who had been in the Vietnam War, gotten a GI Bill, went to school and got a college education, became principals and so forth. And the steadfast black teachers in those schools that set an example. There was no perseverance of pervasiveness, rather, of mediocrity. Unacceptable. And so sometimes what Jonathan may champion may come across as being militant, or the bold statement of using the word black to describe a classical organization may not be palatable for some people. But when you know your history and you know the people who created the path for you, you do feel an obligation to thank them. And so to the young lady in the back with the beautiful purple on that was giving her commercials, I appreciate you and the many others before you more than you know. And many things that Jonathan and I are doing today is literally because you all were out there shaking the branch, shaking the cage to get people to listen. And we do not take you for granted.
If you could wait 1 second, Ms. Betty. Thank you. We are running short on time. I just want to say, so if you submitted questions to us and we don't get to your question, I just want to say we're sorry, but we can respond. We'll be here afterwards if you want to continue to have the conversation with Lee and Jonathan and all of us together. But I just want to say, in case I don't say your question out loud, please, don't be upset. Mike is over here, but yes.
non-segregated north. But at the same time, the latest data shows that there are as many segregated schools in this country today as there were in 1963.
Exactly.
They're just in different places and for different reasons. And that's why we can't put down, we can't stop marching. We've got to keep on acting and getting out there and being part of these community organizations that are pushing for change. Because if we don't push for change, we fall back.
That's right.
Thank you.
Point.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say I'm so happy I'm here. I got off work, I was running kind of late, and I was like, no, go. And I'm so glad. The first thing is that I want to say I have a son who's an artist, and he does spoken word and everything, and like I really see him one day because he's about black. I'm about black, and so I've handed it down, and I'm just so grateful. And I've been a part of the African historical organizations here, but I want to say that I've done some genealogy, and I was glad to hear you say that 40% came through South Carolina. I believe we had some roots from the slave master in Lawrence. And so I've been kind of stuck. And so I'm trying to get through, that door because they came to Alabama. So I have that Texas and Alabama blood by way of Lawrence. So I'm going to use the rooms and use the organizations, but as I was coming over here, we were in a conversation and we were talking about everything that's going on. How do we, and I know music is healing, but like how do we really like get to the healing piece because our communities are traumatized? And like how do we really get to the healing process to begin the healing process for our communities when it's a vicious cycle?
I'm a very strong component to what you do with your children. Once the damage has been done, that cannot be changed, but you have an unbelievable opportunity to work with children. And working with children is healing. You have that opportunity to help and support them. And one of the most important aspects of a community are the artists. That in itself is nurturing and healing. So when we have children that, well, first of all, every child is an artist. I'm a component that art is a part of our DNA. And for anyone that would question it, look into cave culture. When there is a problem in a community, in a family, when the police, detectives, social workers get involved, the first thing they do is give a child paper and pencil. And why do you suppose they do that? Because that's a way of a child expressing themselves, dealing with whatever the problem is, and it allows them an opportunity to breathe and tell their story. So in our communities, we must support the arts. And I think for many African Americans, that has always been something that I think under the auspices of religion that we have been instructed not to do, not to make the image of man. We have to make these images. We have to support our children in making these images. And those images become our records. And our records become a part of our history. And it becomes a part of a healthier, more vitalized community and culture.
Thank you. And because we're running short on time, I'm going to take these last few questions and maybe roll them all into one.
Okay.
that will also be rolled into maybe your final comments. And again, we'll be here afterwards if audience members have more questions and want to continue the discussion. So here we go. Classical music is viewed and experienced as privileged. How can this project ensure accessibility and exposure to youth and general population? So put a button in that. And this kind of ties into, I think, what will be the message that the audience will walk away with after experiencing the debut of the Requiem for Rice?
On the first, related to education, the Color Music Festival, like any arts organization, we have a community and education engagement segment. And the sole purpose of that particular component of the festival is to take classical instruments into underserved communities where children do not have access to a symphony hall or a concert series hall. As a young black kid who was raised in a rural area of South Carolina, my music teacher, Mildred Gilmore Bavard, was the incubus for my interest in music. Not only was she gorgeous and every little black boy had a crush on her, but she was a stickler for detail, and you did not come into her classroom ill-prepared. She expected you to do your homework and be prepared when you came in the next day. This is where we can get major corporate entities and private foundations to support these endeavors that are geared towards underserved communities. It is called funding. The ability to give a child who has no access to a Suzuki violin literally can be the difference in changing a child's life and putting them on a trajectory they never even imagined. But yet we will spend millions to erect a stadium, a coliseum, and put money in ways that my eyes roll over when I think about the challenges we have to fund the festival for 7 days. And we have people who will give a politician $10 million to spew propaganda. Our priorities are askew. Every educator will tell you if a child masters the fundamentals of music, reading comprehension will go up exponentially. The ability to stick with something, which leads to advanced degrees, goes up exponentially. Not to mention the cultural aspect of being exposed to something that is different. So I think the goal, the overarching goal is once the Requiem for Rice, the libretto and the composition is finished by Dr. Trevor Weston, is to have a full force education pre-op, so to speak, to educate people about the origin of the word Requiem, its relationship to the Rice culture and why that is important, but most importantly, to get into underserved communities and bring children in so that they can be exposed to this. Artists like Anquinette and others are masters at engaging children and keeping their attention more so than we believe with classical music. So I hope that's as concise as I could make it.
Yes, and we have two in the audience right there. Haven't moved a lick. That's a good sign.
And Jonathan, as maybe your last sort of wrap up, can you talk a little bit about after the composition is finished and we do the debut, how are we sustaining the energy that is generated from this wonderful piece and moving it forward into the future and taking it beyond what your initial dreams were?
Well, it'll be a component very much like any form of music that we have done, from gospel to jazz to blues, call and response. The music came out of the fields. That's one of the issues that Lee and I talked about very late in the morning hours.
3 a.m.
Because he said, well, you know, what's with this? Well, I said classical music. So much of it came out of the fields. The Africans brought the banjo. Their drums were taken away from them, tambourines, a whole host of instruments were brought here and made by Africans. And the part of this Requiem that's really fascinating for me is that it has first an African component. Got to bring those drums back into the lives of our children. The drums it's a language. The beating of drums is a language. That's why they took them away from us. So for our children to be able to hear the trajectory from Africa, classic, those rice fields, they will understand. You don't have to explain anything to children. They will understand clearly what that music is, what it means to them by the way they feel. I know myself, when I listen to music, I'm just almost paralyzed when the music is right and good. And so we know that we have this most extraordinary team of people that's going to make this Requiem an international success. And also, mind you, rice is not just here and there. Rice covers the globe. So not only will our children understand the importance and the magnitude of this work, Asians will, South Americans will, people from every part of, wherever people eat rice, will begin to understand the importance of this music.
Well, thank you so much to our guests, Jonathan Green and Lee Pringle, for coming to Pittsburgh to talk about the Requiem for Rice and to share all of your knowledge and experiences with us. Thank you so much to our live and internet audience for submitting your questions and being a part of the conversation. I just want to say also, if we did not get your question, we do still have them, so we may tweet or put it on social media and on the Facebook page, so just keep in touch with us. Hashtag Requiem for Rice. Our website is beautiful. Check it out, requiemforrice.com. You can find all the information there about the process or collaborators and how you can join us next time. And the Twitter at Requiem for Rice. Make sure you follow us on Twitter and all of that. And again, I thank you so much. Again, my name is Ann Quinique Wingfield, and I appreciate all of you being here tonight. And as a Pittsburgh native, I'm very proud that we all showed up and had so many wonderful things to say. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
On behalf of the African Heritage Classroom Committee, my name is Laura Ann Bray, and I'm the chair. And I, again, just want to thank everyone for coming this evening. A particular thank you to Dr. Etta Fields Black, to Antonique, to Mr. Jonathan Green, and Mr. Lee Pringle. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I also want to thank all of the members of the African Heritage Classroom Committee who came out and who really helped out, and also the Nationality Rooms Intercultural Exchange Program. The staff is here, the director is here, Maxine Bruns, and all of her staff. So if people dealing with the Nationality Rooms, if you just want to raise your hand, and if we can just specially acknowledge them for all of their assistance. And in closing, I particularly want to say that this collaboration with Etta has been wonderful, and we are so looking forward to moving ahead with more collaboration, with more inter-exchange. And if it wasn't for the lovely lady in the purple who was acknowledged earlier, our program chair, Kay Fitz. Kay she's just a wealth of history and knowledge, and it was Kay's insight that actually said to the African Heritage Classroom Committee, we need to take a trip. We need to go to the Gullah Island, and we need to educate the community about Gullah Geechee culture. So in saying that, Kay met Dr. Fields Black and just brought this all together and put us all to work, and this is what we have today. So I'm very thankful to all of the members of the Nationality Rooms program. I love all of you, and please, if you didn't get a chance, we have a lot of information on our table. We do have a flyer. We're hoping to take a trip. It's tentative right now, unless we get at least 40 people signed up, so there's information on our table. This is for March 2016, when I heard that the weather is still beautiful and not too hot. So please pick up the flyer about that. And we also encourage everyone to join the African Heritage Classroom Committee. We're about education. This whole session tonight was about education. That's what we're about. We raise money to send students to study abroad in a country in Africa, but we also are committed to doing education and programming here in Pittsburgh. And we want to partner, we want to collaborate. So please, program chair, you can talk to me. There are several members, many of us have name tags on, so just grab one of us and talk, and we'll be more than happy to get you involved. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again, and we look forward to upcoming events and participating with Dr. Fields Black on the next program on September the 18th. So we'll share that whenever she has more of the information to share, and hopefully we'll be able to come together and live stream here as a group in Pittsburgh, and we can watch you all in South Carolina. So thank you all again.